Welcome to the Train Rush, hosted by Craig Taylor and Dave Moss. So this is an 18xx podcast. Apologies. It's a train game podcast where we'll mostly be focusing on 18xx. The format is aiming to be between 30 and 45 minutes, discussing a single 18xx come train game title that we have experience of. So hopefully you can get an idea how the game plays out, whether it's for you, whether it's something you might enjoy, or whether it's something you possibly want to avoid. With no further ado, why should you listen to us? Well, I guess we'll leave that to you after the intros. So, Dave, please do tell us more about yourself.
Sure. I guess easiest way to do is talk through my gaming history. So, kind of got into what you'd call modern board gaming in 2000. I was working out in Sweden. A German colleague brought Settlers over with him, and we were absolutely hooked. We spent every night playing it. So, kind of no looking back from that point, and then kind of discovered BGG. Played lots of different things, got into things like Power Grid and Container, discovered I really loved heavy economic games, train games as well. Did some blind play testing of an 18xx called 18EZ. I know it's not necessarily widely regarded as a good teaching game, but for me it was a really good introduction. And since then, as I say, fallen in love with 18xx, would play it over anything else if I get a choice. Love heavy economic, dense games that have lots of things going on. So that's really me and my games history, really.
Cool. I guess I come to it from a similar... Well, no, I don't. I come at it from a rather different angle. I relearnt my love of gaming circa 2010 with Netrunner, believe it or not, a living card game. Introduced to it by a guy at work. And then from there went down the kind of the light game rabbit hole. It was kind of strange. It was great to play because my wife could more easily get into it, who didn't have the same game history I did. So shared activity. But then very slowly, but surely over time, found myself getting more and more corrupted, like somebody with some strange kink. It getting more and more extreme, wanting heavier and heavier games. So I guess really the 18xx is the culmination of that. My first exposure, quite recent actually, to 18xx, was about 2 years ago, playing 1846 with a friend down the club, and came away from it feeling like, gosh, this is work. I might as well have been operating a spreadsheet. For the record, we didn't have a spreadsheet for this particular attack of the game, but feeling like I might have been operating a spreadsheet for the last 5 hours, and we didn't close out the game. Promising that I would never play an 18xx game ever again. Move forward 2 years, and weirdly, the whole thing's inversed. I now, every time I'm playing some sort of game, even a heavy Euro, Dave, I think I could be playing 18xx, and that would be better. That's
exactly where I am, and I think it's my fault for dragging you back into it again, isn't it? I said, you guys should play this, you'd like it, and here we are today, really.
Well, I'm glad that Lindsay, so she'll be mentioned a few times over the course of the podcast, likes it too, because I would struggle to play as much 18xx as I wanted to if my very patient wife didn't also enjoy the format. They didn't also enjoy the format. Let's call it the format. Why not? Is a word. So so now, like I say, now playing a lot of 18xx over a very compressed period of time. So I guess from my point of view, what do I contribute? I guess I don't contribute a depth of a length of experience Dave does. I contribute the perspective of someone who's come at it from a modern gaming point of view and looks at it through that lens rather than kind of... so, for instance, some of my friends who talk to me about 18xx talk about the wonderful build quality of all board games, Dave. And I still struggle to look at it through the lens because I'm always looking at it through the lens of those mass-produced Euros that sell by the tens of thousands, and I'm still struggling to get my head around the fact that this is very much a cottage industry with handcrafted things made in the scales of hundreds, not tens of thousands. So I'm learning to be more forgiving and understanding of that as time goes on. That's by the by. I think you've got an idea for where I'm coming from with this, so moving on to actual... sorry, Dave.
No, I was going to say, I think we're trying to do here is take the listener on the journey with us. We're going to play some games, we're going to tell you what we think of them, how they work, what they like, and we're going to come at it from two different perspectives, really. And although have played it for longer, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm particularly a better player than anyone else. In fact, I'm quite worse than most players, I think, really. Generally, if there's a bankruptcy rule in 18xx, I try and find it in most games. So we'll have some fun, and we'll hear about how that goes through as we play through every couple of weeks, really.
Perfect. So we figured, why start small, right? why start small? You should take on the big challenges, both in gaming and in podcasting. So clearly, you're all desperate to hear about 1822. Is that game you can fit in an evening down the club? Or, oh wait, no, it's absolutely the polar opposite of that. It is an epic 18xx experience, possibly exceeded by a few titles like 18OE and whatnot, but it's still a big one. We've played it between us. I've played it 4 times and Dave's played it 5 times. We've played it together. Each of those 4 times, Dave has always been involved when I've played it. And by it, I actually mean the 1822 system. So that will include 1822 plus. That will include 1822 CA, which I was very fortunate to be able to play at UK Games Expo this year as one of the print copy smoke testers, for want of a better term. Dave, if you want to talk to the specific plays and some of the characteristics of the system, I'd be ever grateful to you.
Let's give everyone a quick overview of what is in 1822. So it's published by designed by Simon Cutterforth, published by All Aboard Games. I think it was published in 2016. Certainly it won the Golden Elephant, the Heavy Cardboard Award for Best Heavy Game of the Year that year. We'll assume at this point that our audience knows about 18xx games. If you don't, please let us know, and we'll do an episode to give a recap on how that works in general. But what sets 1822 aside from that? What makes it work differently? So one of the key elements of the auctions, rather than in most 18xx's, you have an upfront auction for your private companies and your minor companies. These persist throughout the whole game in 1822, and you get them drip fed into the game, part and parcel of that, and you're auctioning every share round. You're auctioning off a set number of private companies, set number of minor companies, and concessions to form major companies, which will form later in the game. So that's a really key logic shift. No longer is that old 18xx adage of never leave a share round with cash in hand. There's always a share you can buy that can work for you. That's very different than this. At the end of each share round, you're passing out and you're evaluating next turn order based on money held, and potentially you may want to keep money in those share rounds for future acquisitions.
And I would absolutely say that to my exposure or experience, that it really is a huge difference between it and other titles. The mechanism for the auctions feels very much inspired, although Simon, do message me if I'm wrong in this, it feels very similar, if not inspired, by Homesteaders title released by Tasty Minstrel Games, thank you, with cubes going around a track, and when you're low on the track you ain't winning the thing. But it's not just about the ergonomics of how you do it. That feels very Euro-y, and actually it was this conversation I had with a few people playing that it feels kind of not out of place but weird in an 18xx setting. But it works. It absolutely works. It's ergonomically, it's great, and I'm glad to see it in an 18xx game, because when I saw it in Homesteaders, I don't actually like that game that much, but I love the way that it does auctions. So seeing it in a Meteor game, I fully appreciate.
And I think one of the things there is that this auction mechanism, although 1822 probably is not a great point for anyone to jump in and learn as their first 18xx, that auction mechanism is something that would help and would be familiar. So,
yes.
if people are keen to play, it's definitely one that's worth considering, depending on their sort of ability to want to jump in feet first and see how it goes. But yeah, the auctions is a very much a key part of this game.
Yeah, well, I also concur with you that the other aspect of it, you talking about the timing and how you always want to try and have your money working for you. Having money in your personal fund is a waste of time at the end of the stock round in most games. The interesting thing about this as well is the order things come out makes every game a unique instance. We tried to do the math on this before the podcast, and I'll be blunt, I got fed up of doing factorials, but you'll never see in your lifetime, if you were to play it non-stop, you will never see, well, maybe if you're incredibly lucky, but the likelihood of you seeing an identical game is almost nil. And as such, and the nice thing about it is most people, a lot of us play 18xx because we like deterministic games where what people do determines the outcome. Well, how does this work? It's variable setup. It's input random. Now, most people play with the house rule. Well, most times we've played with the house rule that you can inspect the deck. So although the concessions come out and the privates come out and the minors come out is random, it's known. which makes a huge difference. If I think, although the first time I played it, I didn't inspect the deck because it's a big game. First one I played as Epic, I didn't want more in my brain space than what I'm doing turn to turn. Certainly didn't have the spare brain cycles to operate on a strategic level rather than the kind of the tactical on the first play. Second play onwards, I was looking at that deck. And I think that's what gives it the depth, right? You can go, well, okay, this game, the Brightons, not the Biscuits, as we'll call it, I guess, isn't going to do that well. Go on.
And I think what's the key need for that for that reasoning of the randomness to be known is a game of synergies. You're trying to form synergies between these private concessions and the functionality they give you, the minor companies which are dotted around across the whole of the map. So for reference, it is obviously set in Great Britain, or 22 is CA is set in Canada, but you've got 30 privates set across the map in various locations, and they can potentially form synergies with the major concessions as well. So it's knowing when things come out, how to build those things that are going to work well together, enable you to build track and work in a friendly manner or work in a hostile manner to one of your competitors. So that knowledge is really, really critical, and again, that drives decisions you make in the auction process.
Absolutely. Of course, auction's just one facet.
The other thing I was going to touch on with the auctions is what they drive as well is in every share round, depending on the number of minor companies that have been started, again, they can trigger train rusting. So the game, like in some other 18xx's, probably most prevalent in something like 1880, whereby the game will drive trains disappearing from the game at various points. And
18CZ, let's talk to 18CZ doing that, because I think a lot of people are going to have exposure to that. It's a reasonably accessible modern title that has, to a certain extent, injected interest in a wider audience for 18xx.
Yeah, and I think 80 and CZ are obviously both designed by the same individual, so I think there's definitely a trait they use there. But again, that's been adopted as part of 1822. And that train rush can kind of catch you unawares if it comes at the end of a share round. Totally. So going back to location geography, as we said earlier, 22 is its core game, and 22 Plus are both set on a large GB map. It's very big by comparison to other 18xx's. Maybe obviously things like 18OE, for example, don't necessarily get into that space.
Well, it's nodally big, right? It's got lots of hexagons.
Yes,
Simon wisely used a 25mm hex as opposed to 42mm hex. This thing will fit on your table. It's fine. It will fit on most people's dining tables. I would hazard a guess. It won't fit on your coffee table. Carry on, Dave.
Yeah, no, and again, that's one of the key things. So you've got smaller tiles, large hex. Large volume of hexes on the map. So how does that get around? How does the game mitigate that effect? Otherwise, it would be a very slow crawl. So once you get into the green phase 3 in this one, major companies are laying two yellow tiles or upgrading. So that allows things to move pretty quickly. Obviously, if you've got synergy of a couple of these minor companies working alongside a major, you can be laying 5-6 tiles in an operating round and really crossing that gap of the country pretty quickly.
Well, I'm going to backtrack a second here. We're allowed to backtrack on the podcast if not in the game. So I just want to raise a couple of points. Geography comes into it because you mentioned it being in Britain / Canada, and I think actually it's probably a good time to talk about the concessions, because we mentioned them in passing. It's pretty unique in my experience to 1822, the concept of a concession. So what's a concession? It kind of links slightly to the quasi-socialist background of the United Kingdom, where the socialist streak, where concessions are basically, when you bid on a concession, it operates like a private, giving you a fixed income, but its power is it lets you can convert it into the president's share for one of the major companies once you hit phase 3, I believe that's when the free trains come out. Yep. You may launch the concession. They're quite expensive. They start at a minimum, they're auctioned off, as you know, but the opening price for those guys is 100. And here's the thing, it's a gift voucher for £100 stroke dollars, depending if you're playing CA, towards the par price of whatever company, of the company you choose to open. I figured I'd mention that now, because we're going down the road of concessions. We've mentioned that without actually saying what it is, and it's considering it's a unique artifact, this game, I figured.
And as you say, at that point you've got the concession. You can sit on it for as long as you want once you've won the auction. If you haven't opened it by the time the 5 trains come, it does disappear. But up until that point, at some point in a future share round, so not the share round you buy it in, but in a future share round, you can convert it to a company and it's operational straight away in 18xx terms. There's no need to sell to 50-60%, anything like that. It's up and running. It's incremental cap as you go through the game. So that means that every share you sell is going to put money at the current market rate into the company's treasury.
That's such a good point, actually, because I've done the old implicit information thing as well, Dave. To be clear, once someone has the concession, they have the reservation on the major company as well. No one can buy shares in that same thing and launch it underneath them. Only they can open the company. Might as well be explicit rather than implicit.
No,
right?
I think it's good to clear things up. And once you've got your major company, it has a historic destination. So, for example, the London North West Railway, its starting point is London. Its historical destination is Manchester. If it can run a train between those two locations, one single train that is, then it will double the value of the destination location. And again, that can be a really, really key point for generating good revenue runs later in the game.
But I also like it as well in the sense that this game, to me, feels like a sandbox game. Okay, it's big. You can do pretty much what you want. You might not be successful just doing what you want, but you can do whatever you want. In terms within the constraints of the random order of things coming out. I like that doubling the value of the historic destination to encourage something that's vaguely a pseudo-realistic representation of the companies involved. I've played other games where they force you to do things in a certain order because historicity. Word. Carry on, Dave. Sorry.
And I think it was very interesting. The first time we played the game, it was the first time we sat down and played it. We actually had to sticker my copy up beforehand. Thank you very much for doing that for me. And the first time we played it, literally we built an almost replica of the UK train network. We had an East Coast main line, we had a West Coast main line, and it kind of felt like that. But I've played it other times, and the game has built off in all sorts of strange directions. We managed to succeed Scotland at some point, and that had its own private railway network that wasn't linked into anything else. So yeah, I think, as you say, absolutely it's a sandbox. I think, most 18xx's are to varying degrees. This one is certainly right on that sort of right end of the spectrum. Heavy free opportunity to do what you want in the system and see what happens.
I have played the odd one where the only sandbox element feels like where you lay the rails. This one, and like I say, otherwise they feel very, very restrictive. This one certainly feels sandboxy, but I do appreciate Simon putting an incentive to build something that's not just completely insane. And I say that because I say I come from a background where my initial entrance into 18xx was American titles, because most of them are set in America. So to a certain extent, although I like America, I'm Americanophile, I'd argue, I know nothing about their rail network. So, I might as well be playing on the moon as far as that's concerned. Well, hey, does that train loop exist? Does that rail loop exist? I have no idea. But it's making me a load of money. Whereas playing on a UK map, I now realise when people talk about, you want to get the one where you live, and it has this value where it resonates. Actually playing on the 1822 on a UK map did resonate, and I can see what they're saying now, having directly experienced that. So that's an interesting part of the experience for me.
So I think, so we've covered off the size of the game, we've covered off the uniqueness of the orgs of the companies. I guess the next logical thing is to look at the trains.
Sure.
So you've got a couple of interesting trains in this mix on this one. You start the game, your minor companies can buy what are called local trains at the start of their turn. They can actually buy them at the start of their very first turn as part of first turn housekeeping. These local trains are in effect 1+1 trains in reality, so they'll run the large city they start on, and they'll run to the next nearest small little doink town, whatever people call them. We know that's a very, very personal term in many 18xx communities.
No. They're doinks, and everybody else is wrong, Dave. Let's get that straight.
Well, it's always
if you're listening to this, it's doinks.
Either way, they're running today. So they're interesting because your miners are up and running straight away, and they function pretty much as most miners do in most companies. They'll run on 50-50 between the president, who's the sole shareholder, and the company's treasury. As we talked earlier, trains can get rusted through the game, which is good. That helps it chug along. You start with, I think, something in the region of 20
chug
L's.
Along, Dave.
Yeah,
chug along.
We're going to fill up with puns through this, I'm sure, and I will apologise to them in advance. The L's and the 2s are double-sided. Each miner can upgrade an L to a 2 as part of its process. And then once you get into the 3, the proper game sort of starts in effect. Looking at the back end of the train spectrum, you've got what are called express trains. Now I think the concept of these, again, occurs in quite a few different 18xx's, but as with most of them, they work slightly different in each variant. So with 22, what they do is they run for an infinite length, obviously subject to normal run rules. You can't run through blocked out cities. But all they will count on those stops are places that have your station tokens in. So they will double the value of every city that has a station token in, and if you were paying attention earlier, the historical destination is already doubled, so that would be quadrupled. So what you'll see with those express trains is they can run pretty well. They come in very late in the game. They maybe have 3. I don't think I've ever seen them run for more than 3 operating rounds, but I would say 4 at a very push if you got the first one. And they can make a lot of money.
I was going to say, they're taking mega bucks out of the game. Once the E-trains come in, you're done in 6 more operating rounds.
Not even that, I think 4 at most.
4. Yeah, I guess it depends on the number of players, right?
True.
So, I mean, in that 6-player game, I think they ran for 4.
Yeah, I think 4 is the most I've ever seen them run.
Because don't forget they're expensive, right? So by function of buying them, you're sticking more money back into the game.
Yes.
So there's that kind of thing. I would say whoever buys them is going to get their money back and then some, no question. I would say that was interesting in our first play, wasn't it? That the E-trains basically didn't come out. You were the only guy building. I think it's interesting because if everybody is building towards generating E-train runs, then they're very profitable because the network is shaped in a way that enables high payouts. In the first game where you were the only person doing that,
and trying to get my station dollars out in the right place,
and we were aggressively blocking because we weren't interested in the E-trains, it puts a cap on the value. So I don't think they're a fait accompli. I think it depends how your group plays. I think it depends what the majority of the group is trying to achieve. But they are certainly an interesting aspect of the game. I think most games will end with them being a significant factor.
And I think they can generate a lot of revenue. So how do those big runs happen for those E-trains? So obviously, as you say, you set yourself up, you put your stations on the board. You can have, I think, 7 stations in the end. Mm-hmm. So that can be quite a lot of stops you're running to. And again, once you're counting all of those dollars, doubling them, quadrupling one of those, you can be looking at runs 1,000 plus comfortably for part and parcel of that. So one of the implications of that, how is that a good thing for you as the player, as the president of a company? So the ownership is a really important thing. So you can buy up to 60% of the shares, as you can, and think in most standard 18xx's. Mm-hmm. There are obviously, as always, some variants on that, but yeah, you can buy 60%. However, you can acquire the additional 40% to give you 100% ownership through merging in the minor companies into the major companies. So I don't know if you were going to talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Sure, absolutely. So you will be operating these minor companies throughout a good proportion of the game. These guys, they are on a fixed. They're fixed, pay the director 50%, retain 50% themselves. But as the trains escalate in cost, they'll become more and more of a liability because unless they have a very profitable shuttle route, these guys are not going to make enough money to buy their own trains. And of course, you can feed them trains from their big brother. You can do all sorts of things, but ultimately, you're probably going to want rid. Now, because you can't dump them on people, because the way they work is it's a single piece of cardboard. You own it. It's your liability. How do you clear that liability? You merge it into a big company, into a major corporation you own. Now, when you merge, you take the value of the little company, and effectively its share value, and you double it. One for yours, because its total value is the share you hold and the share the company implicitly holds in its treasury. And the major corporation has to give you that much in compensation. So let's look at the example here. The example would be I have a company that's worth a minor company that's worth 200. My major corporation, just for purposes of round math, is worth 100 a share right now. So it can give me 0, 1 or 2 shares as part of that transaction. So that'd be a nice clean transaction where it would give me 2 major shares. I already own 6 shares for that company, guys, taking me up to 80% of shares. As compensation for the minor company ceases to exist. Its station marker, I can either convert that into the major corporation station marker or move it across onto my available station markers, where it will then cost me another £100 to deploy later on.
And that's a really key point. Your major company comes with its home station, its historical destination, and one other. So theoretically, you've only got 3 available stations in the game.
Absolutely.
The only other way you unlock the stations, again, is through this mergers and acquisition process, which allows you to either replace, as you were saying, the existing station of the miner, or free it up and incur the cost of placing it elsewhere where you want to later on.
Well, getting it right is key, I think, to a successful play of this, because there's lots of ways you can get it wrong. You could leave the miner company that just climbs up the share value track for too long, and your major can't afford to buy the station. I've seen that happen. It can use cash as part of the transaction, but if its shares aren't very good and it's destitute, good luck merging that miner in. It's going to be a liability. Its share value's high, but you still may end up having to buy things out of pocket. Although that said, I've seen situations with those miners, because you are exclusively getting 50% of the run value yourself, no other players at the table are getting that. I've seen situations where actually it makes a lot of sense to buy a train out of pocket.
Oh, very much so.
Depending when in the game it happens. If you can buy a permanent train, the first permanent train out of pocket, it's going to pay to the end of the game if it's got a really productive route, and you'll see that money many times over.
Yeah, and as you say, it's yours exclusively. Definitely some of them, if they come out in the right place at the right time, they're well worth running to the end of the game. More often than not, they're a vehicle to, as you say, release stations and release ownership capacity in a company. And as you say, they become a challenge to manage until you can get them full collapsed into the major company. But aside from that, if you can manage that challenge, that's primarily what they're good for. But they are there, and I think the first time we played it, you ran the number 10, the Birmingham one, which has now gone down in legendary status amongst us. You ran that through to the end of the game. It got the first 5. It had a very profitable little run between North Wales down through Birmingham, and I think coming into Oxford, Reading way. And you just ran that and rode that gravy train all the way home.
Well, for now, and which is unfortunate, because now the 10 company has a permanent upgrading value every time there's an auction, so I'll never look at it again. I don't want to pay that much for it when I got it basically for free last time. I guess the thing, just dialing back to the mergers very, very briefly, the thing I would say is that I find that breaking ownership limit mechanism fundamentally more interesting than some others out there. I've seen forced purchasing where you can buy shares at a premium. That's interesting, but it just feels like, okay, I've got money advantage already. It feels it integrates for me the mergers with the track, having to have a connection between your company and the minor company. It rewards good track play as well. It feels like you've played for that advantage to break the ownership limit, rather than I've just had good revenue.
And I think one of the key things that it does do is, as the experienced player around the table will be looking to spot, is you're looking at it going, well, I very much don't want that player to have 100% of that company. So when the share round comes around and you're at 50% of the company, I want to snipe in and find a way to get one of those shares. Otherwise, there's a possibility at the end of the game, and I think we saw this in our last playthrough, somebody had 80-90% of one company, they're running the express train for 1,000, and they're taking all of that themselves, sharing next to nothing with anyone else, and they came from the middle of the pack and won that game in the end.
Well, totally. And I would say, here's the thing, right? I think it's more I think that's what's the other aspect of it that makes it more interesting than forced share purchasing. So, example, 1835 I played the other week. You can buy shares once you're past a certain ownership threshold. You can buy shares off other players for 150% of their value, and they can't say no. Okay, so it's a slow climb to 100%.
And you've got to have a lot of capital yourself to achieve that.
Of course, but if it's a good company anyway, you're going to want to buy those shares, and odds are, you know what it's like in these games. If I can own 100% of a company and get all that money myself, that's money nobody else is earning.
Yep.
I feel that actually, when you have that, there's no counterplay element. Oh, well, you got past that threshold. Tough luck for me, isn't it? Those shares, I'm not holding on to those. Whereas with this, you could do clever things with stationing and defensive railway that you could potentially block another company from merging. You just buy the shares. There's loads of options, but I really like that aspect of this title, or this system, because it features just to be clear, it features in 1822 Canada too. By the way, that's not Dave growling, that's my dog.
So that's probably a good time just to look at the variations that are available on 1822. So you've got the standard out in the box, 1822, as I say, published I think 2016 by All Aboard Games. And that's there, and I think that's on V2 publishing now with some slight upgrades to it. They've also just recently introduced 1822 Plus, which is an additional set of privates So I may earlier have said there were 30 minor companies. There's actually only 24 in the base game. You get an extra 6, which can either be replaced or mixed in as part of the 1822 Plus deck.
Mix them in.
Yes, we did that for our game at the weekend. It was much more epic having them all mixed in and playing with all of those extra ones. So that's some extra privates, some extra minors as part and parcel of that. And then you've also got what's coming later this year, which is 1822 Canada, which is a co-design between Simon Cutterforth and I can't remember the guy's name, Robert, somebody else.
Yeah, well, your first name terms from Dave, it's fine. Your first name terms from
and
don't be embarrassed, it's fine. If that's how chummy you are. It's Robert. I'm going to embarrass myself now.
I want to say Lapierre.
No, you don't. You want to say you don't want to pronounce that. Le Soiree.
Okay, so let's tell you what, we'll edit this bit out.
Answers on a postcard. It'll be fine. Carry on.
So yeah, 1822 CA is coming later this year from All Aboard Games. It is the same system put on a new map, and if it's possible to be even more grandiose, it is. We were very fortunate. We met Simon Cutterforth, the designer, up at UK Games Expo a few weeks back, and we very kindly got to play test with him.
Or was he fortunate, Dave? Was he fortunate?
He'll be believing he was fortunate now, having listened to us talk about this game.
Of course, carry on. Sorry, I apologise.
But no, we met up and we very nice to spend some time in his company, talk about the game, learn about the design process, and very much then obviously play Canada. If it's possible to make it an even bigger map, it is still the same small hex size, hex tile sizing. A lot of things work the same way. There are some additional granary Pullman trains. They work in the same way a normal Pullman would do in terms of counting little dits, but these count tokens. Are
Pullmans a common artefact? Is that a toy we need to talk to, Dave?
We probably just need to mention them, I suppose. So in 22 terms, a Pullman adds all the little doinks, whatever word we're using to describe that.
That's fine.
Adds all of those to your run without counting them against your run, which in train terms is quite a big thing.
Of course, absolutely. So if you get the counter value without counting the nodes in terms of range for the train, it's huge. And yes, you win them. So to be clear, you win these in one of the many auctions in the game. You win them, and like a private, you fold them into a company when the time's right. They can only come in phase 5 onwards, so they don't come until quite late. So you can spend money early on them in an early auction and think, gosh, I wish I'd had a share. That can happen. But jeepers, if you have one on a 6 train, picking up an extra 60, 70, 80 a run is just crazy. Just absolutely crazy. I think the express trains can't use them. I think that's the only, because they literally only count.
Yeah, express trains can't because they only count the station tokens that you put on the board. So
because the 7s and the expresses come out at the same time, if you've got a Pullman, maybe there's value in taking the 7 instead. I don't know. But the context is grain trains in 1822 Canada are like the Pullmans we've just described. However, they count these special printed bits on the board called granaries or grain silos, I think, and they pick up an extra 10 rev per. Here's the thing, right? There's less grain silos than there are towns and doinks. However, the grain train comes in earlier, comes in from phase 3. I think I didn't get involved in the grain game when we played. I just did a bog standard big number value game down the bottom of the board and got left alone, which was fine. I'll take that. But they seem like a fundamentally interesting artefact. Dave? And
I think the interesting thing is that they are they're quite dense. So all of the granary silos are very close together. And if you can get a train that can catch a couple of those, you also get a bonus for hitting a port for servicing the Great Lakes. Or off on the west coast of Canada. In fact, you can actually run a granary train from port to port via all the grain silos, and that can be worth quite a lot of money.
And what I thought was a bit weird, maybe distorting, I don't know. It's only one player of 1822 CA, so this isn't any significant commentary. It's an impression rather than a judgment. I thought that had the potential of distorting the game significantly. If you could get a grain train early and get mid-game revenue, but in the early game you could be buying a lot of shares.
I think they're undoubtedly powerful. Again, I think with the whole thing, and it caveats on the whole system, I think it really is relative as to when they appear. So going back to the example we were talking about earlier, where we saw the number 10 private in Birmingham come out very early in one game, and it was super powerful. In just about every other playthrough I've played through since then, I've always looked at the deck, and it's been at the back end, and by then it doesn't have the same level of power. So that's one of the great bits around the variability of the game.
And I guess that's the auctioning, right? If you don't agree, say, if I, for argument's sake, have the perspective that the granary trains are good value, then I should be upbidding them in the auction, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it can be frustrating if you've got a company that's nowhere near there, right? But I should at least be upbidding, and you don't necessarily want the grain train landed on you because you can't use it. But the point being is the players between them, there should be enough players with an interest in the grain train that the right value should be paid for it. I think possibly because it was our only player of Canada, we may have undervalued those. That might have been the problem.
I definitely think that's the case. I think we clearly, as we've played, and again we've played, as you said earlier, I think we've played 4 games together, and I played 5 in total. Our perception of value has changed greatly, and our understanding, which is going to happen. With every 18xx, it's not one of those games that you open at the box, you play it once, and you've seen all it's got to offer. It has that depth, it has that replayability, even without the variability this system introduces.
I agree, and I think actually, I would say this is a title that is defined by its toys. Let me explain. So, specifically for me, this game is in part, we talked about the auctions, but in part it's defined by, like I say, the many privates that are in it. So to me, to a certain extent, when you first play 1846, the difference between something like 1846 and 1830, for argument's sake, is the variety of privates and the way you can glue these various little widgets and whatsits together to try and pull value out of the game. This very much is a game where you've got a big old toy box, and I can't tell you if that Optimus Prime Transformer is covered in gank or not, and therefore what's its value. When you've played it a few times, you realise the ease of which some of these things can be turned into massive value, and some of these things are traps. I mean, for instance, in our first game, and actually weirdly in the last game we played, there's a company that pulls money. It's a private that pulls money to the player and also pulls an equivalent amount of money into a little portfolio, which when you buy the company in is gifted to the company. Now, just for want of a better term, it's a parachute payment, right? It's, oh no, my company's about to get into trouble, can't afford a train, let's pull this company in. Here's the crazy thing, it pays out 10 times the current phase number. Yes. So the longer you can keep that company, the bigger and nastier train it can buy. And by rights, this little private, it should go for 200 plus. Easy. The amount of money, bear in mind, in 4 phase 5 turns, 4 phase 5 ORs, it's going to make that money back. Okay, it should go for that.
Well, but both it and the player make that money back. So you're making money yourself as a player, and this, as I call it, the Highland cash cow, sits and holds a bunch of cash. And as you say, that's there to drop into a company to help bail out of trouble.
Totally.
Word of warning, though, don't get caught out like I did in Canada. It does disappear. And I got caught out by the train rush and waved goodbye to 300 plus Canadian dollars worth of investment funds and gave them back to the bank at that point.
Of course. But this is the thing, I'm talking about that toy, right? And so the first time we played it, I got it on the cheap because no one really could foresee the value of it whilst trying to calculate 101 different other things. Last game, I got great value on it because everybody had made themselves destitute in the share round, come auction round before. So it was available to me cheaply because I held the money back. And I guess this is where we round the circle, right? About that timing of how the timing of the auctions means that some classic 18xx conventions just do not apply. I guess realistically, we should just talk to our final thoughts on it and where we think this sits versus other things we played and who you'd recommend it for. What sort of experience would somebody need to play this? What sort of experience in terms of type of fun someone wants would be the right player for this? Who would like this?
Shall I go first?
No, please do. Yeah, absolutely. I'm asking the question. I'm inviting the answer, Dave.
So I think from my point of view, it is one of the more modern 18xx's. It's come in this recent wave of fresh design thinking. I think it's very good. I think it's really exemplary as one of those modern designs. I think it shakes the way things work up. We've talked quite extensively about that. One of the things that for me personally it really does very well is it has a great narrative arc, as hopefully you've gathered through the way we've discussed the games that we've played in. We can recall events and specific companies and specific privates and the impact they've had. So it really builds that wonderful narrative that you see. I think 18xx does that well. It's a common trait you also see in wargaming, I think. So, from my point of view, alongside 18 Ireland, 1817, which I'm sure we're going to discuss in future episodes, it sits up there with the really fresh, modern thinking ones. Is it something I'd introduce to somebody as a first-time play? They'd have to want to play 18xx, I think. It's not complicated, It does nothing particularly complex, but it has a lot of wrinkles and edge cases and stuff that really kind of means that it's probably not your best teaching one.
I'd use one of the scenarios. The reason being that with someone playing it for their first time, this would be I'll decide to use a strong word here. It would be an ill-advised one to use for someone's first play, because you are living with the consequences of your mistakes for a very long time in the full game.
And I think the stronger player, as we've alluded to in some of the last couple of conversation nuggets, the stronger players who've got the inherent knowledge of having played it more will win out in that. So it can be quite brutal, as you say.
Well, you can say about any 18xx, right? Because it's strictly deterministic. That's one of my things I love about the format. It rewards experience. It's unashamed. There's no rubber banding to pull someone back in it. Oh, you rolled a 6, therefore, it's that's what I love about the format. But if you're going to teach someone something, I think it's a bit unfair to have someone live with the consequence of a decision they made 10 minutes in for the next 9 hours. However, it's a surefire way to turn somebody off. I know interest. The clear clause says something. Interest will carry you a long way. Introduce somebody to whichever title they're interested in, and I'm fine with that. Use the scenario, don't use the full game.
True. No, that's a very fair point. And the scenarios are freely available on the BGG website. I think Simon's published those. They may even be on the AAG website as well. But I do think, if somebody's played a couple of 18xx's, is really enthusiastic in the system, as you say, particularly if they're in the UK and want to see that, or Canada for that matter, it would be a great one. It would really resonate. So for me, I think, as I say, I would... I give it a very clear 9 out of 10. I don't know, are we doing a scoring thing?
Can do if you can do. I'm going to use words as opposed to numbers because I believe in words.
Fair enough.
I'm not a machine. I'm not a number.
I'll give it 9 coal shovels just to add some train theme to
it. Of course, please do. So I'll answer my own question. I would say here that for me, it's very much along the engineering route. Okay, if you like dumping companies on people and those sort of shenanigans, I'm sure it's possible. But I've not seen it, and possibly because of the group I play with, almost certainly because of the group I play with. But let's put it this way, I've been playing this back to back with 1836 Junior, which is very close to 1830 in terms of its genetics, for want of a better term. And 1830 very much feels like a game about buying companies, treating them okay, but then getting to a point where you abuse them and getting rid of them with someone else. You don't see a lot of that in this, in my experience. It seems very difficult to pull off, and
usually you've invested a lot in getting the company to the point it's at, even if it's destitute and train rusting and struggling. It's very, very, very much an engineering rather than a stocks and shares of financial shenanigans one.
I mean, if I had to say it in a sentence, it's 1846 writ large. Okay, it uses a lot of the things from 1846, the incremental cap, the toy box approach, as I like to call it. The focus on engineering. There's a lot of things. There's no paying for tile lays. There's none of that. But just in terms of general feel, it feels like an epic version of 1846 to me. I'm sure I'm going to be absolutely torn to ribbons for saying that. Please tell me
we will look forward to hearing feedback from our listeners.
Please tell me why I'm wrong. Please tell me why I'm wrong. I'm happy to hear it. Happy to learn. I'm still learning every day.
Definitely one of the things I think we're keen to hear as we go forwards with this. If any feedback is welcome, good or bad, but obviously, we want to hear your thoughts on these games as well. Tell us what you think. Tell us where we've got it wrong. We do get it wrong. Be keen to know.
Dave gets it wrong.
Yeah, more often than not.
Sorry, joking, Karen.
But let's get some feedback. Let's have some discussion. One of the things we can add into future episodes is just taking some of those things, some questions maybe, and just answering them and debating.
What's that? Well, you played 1836. Yes, Dave, I played 1836. So before I'd mention that, Dave, played 1836 Junior. That's our next episode. Thought that would be a good way of bringing it in.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about 1836. I've had a chance of playing that a lot. I think I played that 5 times over the course of a week. It was a crazy amount. I'll admit, for me, it's a voracious hunger born from not having played 1830 before. So
we're also going to solve that problem.
We'll solve that problem. But fundamentally, it is just look. That thing is so tight. It is so refined. There's no flab on it whatsoever,
and we don't want to give too much away. We might have a future episode.
No, of course, but the point is, it's exciting. It's exciting to me, and I want to talk about that. I've come from the modern route of 1846 being the introduction game. That's the one I was taught because it's the common accepted. This is how you learn how to play 18xx, and I fully appreciate that. But so you can imagine what a shock it was to me to play one like 1830. And that will be our next episode. If you've got any specific thoughts on that, any questions about that title that you'd like us to answer, then bang them over.
Email us at...
Well, email us at... So you can email me at... I don't want to use too many ats. Email me at the address craig@thetrainrush.com.
And I think I'm Dave at thetrainrush.com.
You can be. You can be whatever you want at thetrainrush.com, but right now you're Dave at thetrainrush.com.
That sounds good, because otherwise it will be bankruptcy at thetrainrush.com probably.
Wonderful. Grand. Well, thank you for spending the last 45 minutes or so with us, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.